Back in the good old days of the Monday Night Wars in pro wrestling, we were also at the height of the console wars in video games. And one of the most interesting things for anyone who was both a wrestling fan and a gamer was how the two wars crossed over. WWF Royal Rumble for the Sega Dreamcast was an arcade game that came exclusively to Sega's 128-bit console. This was in an era long before the annual WWE 2K game releases, and came in a time when wrestling games were usually very different on each platform. Whilst the N64 got WrestleMania 2000 and the PlayStation 1 got SmackDown, the Dreamcast unfortunately got the short end of the stick. That isn't to say Royal Rumble is a bad game or there isn't fun to be had here, but it's just such a small and short game compared to the released games on the PS1 and N64. This, of course, is because it's an arcade WWF game, and just like WrestleFest or Superstars or WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game had to be designed around something you could do in one playthrough. And it's just been put straight across onto the Dreamcast without really anything extra. Well, maybe a couple of things, a couple of exclusive wrestlers, but anyway. The game is the second WWF game to be called Royal Rumble, with a previous game having released on both the Super Nintendo and Sega Mega Drive. And whilst it was expected that the games in the 16-bit era would feature 10 or 12 playable wrestlers, by the time of the likes of SmackDown and WrestleMania 2000, the games were featuring 30, 40, 50 playable wrestlers. I mention this because the game is titled Royal Rumble, and a game titled Royal Rumble is named after the famous WWE event where there is one match that features 30 wrestlers competing. Well, this is relevant because the Dreamcast game has a roster of just 21 wrestlers. I mean, come on, couldn't they just find 9 more wrestlers to put in it? I know that, like, relatively speaking, that's like a third of the game over again. But don't make a Royal Rumble game if you're not going to put enough wrestlers in there to actually do a Royal Rumble. This means that the game can't even replicate the titular match from that event without having some wrestlers enter more than once. And unless your name is Mick Foley and then you're going to enter the Royal Rumble as Mankind, Dude Love and Cactus Jack, this hasn't ever happened where the same wrestler has entered the same Royal Rumble more than once. The roster, for what there is, has a lot of the main stars from the time, well, and still some of the main stars from today. There is The Rock, there is Stone Cold Steve Austin, Matt and Jeff Hardy, The Big Show, The Undertaker, and more. And the game was the first WWF game to feature the likes of Taz and Kurt Angle. And whilst this was cool, the game does not feature that many wrestlers, and that is a problem. The opening intro video to the game shows wrestlers that aren't even in it. This includes the likes of Stephanie McMahon, Chyna, Jacqueline and the Cat, but the game features no female roster members, so don't think you're going to be going for that Women's or Divas Championship. The game was developed by Ukes, who made the SmackDown games and years later would make the likes of the WWE 2K games up until they didn't, when they jumped ship and made AEW Fight Forever, which I'm sure they wish they didn't. The game looked visually like a more detailed and impressive version of WWF SmackDown, and whilst the Dreamcast could have produced even better graphics had this been built for the ground up for the platform rather than just being a port of the arcade game, this was probably the best looking wrestling game until the SmackDown games moved things over to the PS2. The game only has 2 modes, and this is because in the arcades that was acceptable. On a home console, even back in the year 2000, this was in no way acceptable for a wrestling game. And again, it feels like this game could so easily have been fleshed out, considering that it was made by the games who had made the fully featured SmackDown game. The game features the 2 modes, Royal Rumble and Exhibition. Royal Rumble is the main mode where you enter and have to throw 29 other wrestlers over the top rope. And I mean it when I say you have to throw 29 other wrestlers over the top rope, as it doesn't count when the computer eliminates other wrestlers. So, when it's all said and done, you could have a Royal Rumble match that has literally hundreds of eliminations. Also, there is no sense of wrestlers coming in every 60 seconds or 90 seconds like in the actual WWE event. In the game, you get that familiar horn sound when a wrestler is entering, but this seems to play every few seconds, and whether a wrestler is eliminated, then another one will come straight back in, or whether there is a timer for it, I'm not sure. It seemed to be happening constantly. One of the highlights of the game is that there can be up to 9 wrestlers in the ring at once. And this is still very cool, and I'm not sure how many wrestlers even the modern WWE 2K games or the AEW game can have in the ring at once. I think the max in WWE games may be 8, which plus a referee might mean you see 9, and then the AEW game may be only 4 plus a referee. If that's the case, it's crazy that the Dreamcast game may still hold the record. The game eases you into things, as the first few opponents you face in the Royal Rumble are fairly easy to eliminate, but it gets harder the longer you stay in. If you get eliminated, you can just re-enter until it's all won, and this is a feature I really like. And it makes sense when you think of the arcade game. They're not going to have you start a brand new Royal Rumble every single time. It's going to get you eliminated, you'll insert a coin, and then you'll continue onwards. So even if it's not like the actual Royal Rumble with you entering and re-entering, it's just like an extra life in a video game. The exhibition mode isn't quite as bland as it sounds. Usually on wrestling games, exhibition matches are just practice matches where you can have one-on-one or tag matches, but on Royal Rumble, it's actually like the tournament mode from Street Fighter. You'll go against 10 opponents in a row, and like in the Royal Rumble match types, they get more challenging as it goes along. Strangely, and also like on some fighting games such as Street Fighter, the exhibition mode actually lets you select a tag partner who you cannot tag in, but they can be called upon to jump in and assist. I guess this reminds me of the PlayStation 1 version of X-Men vs Street Fighter, which, if memory serves, allows you to choose a second character for basically the same purpose. It's a real shame that they didn't take the time to add in actual tag matches, so just the mechanic of a wrestler stood up by the ropes that you tag in and then you can take over of them would have added so much more to the game. I also feel like other match types like no holds barred, submission match, and 3 and 4-way matches, or even 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9-way matches would have all been possible really easily just to add to what is already here. And doing that would have added so much more to the game. Just adding more tournaments so you can go after like easy mode to get the Intercontinental Championship or hard mode to go after the World Championship would have just added so much more replay value and more to complete on the game overall. Still, even with all of what I've just said added, it would have still seemed light compared to the N64 and PS1 games, which by this time was starting to get steel cage matches and maybe on the verge of having ladder matches. So maybe they just figured it would be okay if they just put the arcade game out there as it was and not attempt to try to add any more razzle dazzle to it. The game actually doesn't allow you to climb in and out of the ring, which I think is nuts. There are some backstage areas in the game where you can fight, but you literally just seem to be beamed up and teleport there in the game, Star Trek style. This is silly when it just needed the added mechanic of you being able to go in and out the ring and run up the aisle. It literally does have you, well, it has your tag partner at least, climb in and exit the ring, so it's not like there isn't the animation for someone exiting the ring, and I'm sure that wouldn't have been too hard to add in as something that could be controlled by the player. So, with that, the gameplay is super fast and it is actually quite fun, but it can be frustrating as the game frequently has you ending up facing the wrong opponent. With so many wrestlers on screen at once, it did need some kind of clear targeting or way for you to lock onto an opponent that you want to fight at any one time. I like the variety of moves, and the animation is good for the time in which the game was made. Upon playing it recently, for the purposes of this review, I was impressed that the likes of Stone Cold and The Rock had their signature moves and taunts even down to their punching style. The Dreamcast maybe only got this game because of the deal with Sega releasing the arcade game, and it's clear that THQ and Yuke's didn't have big plans for WWF games on the Dreamcast. And this is a shame, as the system could have had the best WWE games in 1999, 2000 and 2001 if they had made them. Imagine a creator wrestler mode with the power of Dreamcast compared to what you could do on No Mercy. You could have then saved a creator wrestler to the Dreamcast's VMU memory card and had minigames or ways to build up the stats like a virtual pet. Imagine a WWE wrestler in your pocket. That would have been innovative. Oh, and this was a Dreamcast game and featured up to 9 wrestlers in the ring at once. Why on earth was there not an online mode for online play so you could have 9-player online matches? That alone could have been its saving grace, where fans would have forgiven the lack of this and the lack of that and other features if its unique selling point was that you could have multiplayer games, the likes of which wouldn't even be possible in the arcade. The game doesn't actually really feature much in terms of superstar music or entrances, and I do like the game, but whereas the N64 and PlayStation WWF games had lots for players to get into, the Dreamcast game isn't really that fully featured, and so it's a shame that Dreamcast owners only got a game they'd have fun with over the weekend. It may be that some players would be happy to bust this out for some mad multiplayer matches often, but especially as a single player game, I played it through over Christmas and then kind of moved on. Fortunately, the Dreamcast also got WWF Attitude, the ECW games, and I think a Fire Pro Wrestling game just to give wrestling fans something, but this could have and should have been so much more. So if you can get a copy of this, I think it is definitely fun and I think it's worth playing, and hopefully nowadays it's not too expensive if you want to play it on actual hardware. No, it doesn't live up to the likes of WWF No Mercy or the SmackDown games, but it's got nice graphics for the time and it is very fast and it is quite playable. So I think this is one that I would recommend, because the era of where you'd be disappointed that it's not as full featured as other games, it kind of doesn't matter now, because if you want something fully featured, just play WWE 2K. There you go. So that's going to wrap things up for this video, so if you have not done so already, please smash that subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. Don't often mention it on the channel, but I also do a lot of pro wrestling content, and if you're watching this video you may also enjoy that, so just look up for the Slam Jam Wrestling Show channel, also here on YouTube, and as well as the Slam Jam shows that we do along with the gaming stuff over at www.xstreamed.tv, where you'll also be able to read lots of wrestling based articles and the written article version of this review. So with that, until next time, I am going to leave things there. So stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, and I'm off the air.